Hey guys, it's M. And today I'm going to be talking about a subject that's been on my mind for about a month or so now. When getting back on the character-specific videos, Juza initially wasn't in my lineup at all, as I felt so positively about him. So I wanted to cover my spicier takes first. But after a certain revelation, I thought it'd be interesting to shed some light on this character. Juza in the original anime is, as I said, one of my favorite characters. A martial artist that wasn't a villain, that just roamed around as he pleased. The second he was introduced in the story, he just had a different vibe from everyone else. His charisma was near immediately apparent, and unlike how Sims say Souther has charisma, it wasn't in a murderous dictator kind of way. When the story starts, we see him just chilling with his army of also chill guys and saving women from raiders in the wasteland. And unlike Yuta or even Jaggy, in his introduction scene, he didn't have any nasty or forceful desires with them, being made abundantly clear when we see the women enjoying his presence and him letting the married ladies go back home with a ton of rations and supplies. When Rihaku's men come for him and they keep asking him to rejoin the Nanto General's forces, I genuinely felt for him. Although we saw the way Rao was mangling people like Huey and Shuren, he unironically seemed like he had everything anyone would ever want in this era. Food, an army of loyal soldiers, and women. So why would he want to give all that up in exchange for dying for some army he has nothing to do with anymore? Let alone for someone he didn't even know the identity of at this point. I remember when I was initially watching it, I guessed he was gonna run into Ken and they'd have some generic bullshit friendship is magic type speech and that would convince him to join back. But no, they ended up having to fucking drug him. While I understand their motives and why they desperately needed him, they kidnapped my boy who was just living his best life. I was pretty lost at this point. Not in the way that I couldn't understand what was happening, but in the way of I couldn't guess what was gonna happen next. As there was no way Juza would just let himself be captured. And with the army that he had, there's no way they'd let someone kidnap him quietly. But then we see him wake up and the Nanto General reveals their face to him. Within an instant, he immediately breaks his shackles and vows his life to serve them. As much as I like to joke on this in retrospect, this is one of the most powerful scenes in the show. We have a man who vowed to live his life free, a man who seemingly had everything he'd ever want, and a man we know wouldn't easily bend if it came to force or a threat, immediately give his life to a character we don't even know the identity of at this point in time. It leaves you with so many questions at once. It makes you really invested in a morally good character by themselves that isn't Ken or Ken related, which the story never really managed to pull off before. As while Rei, Mamaya, and the others were good characters, they didn't have a ton of space to breathe purely on their own. With Juza, we got to practically see his entire lifestyle before he was dragged into the events of the main plot, and it's simply just really good writing. But back to the story itself, Juza's men end up finding him at the Nanto General's tower. When he sees them, he tries to convince them that this is a mission he needs to go on alone, but they refuse to accept that, saying that they'll follow their brother anywhere, no matter what the threat is, showing us the strength of Juza's character and the obvious goodwill he's built with them. When we eventually meet with Juza again, he confronts Rao in a one-on-one match. Considering how we've seen Rao straight disregard the chariots in terms of strength, I'm pretty sure all of us assumed he was gonna die like a dog here. But in their small skirmish, he actually manages to break Rao's helmet and even makes him struggle to catch up. Then he outsmarts him with a trap and takes Coco, cluing us in that he's not like the other chariots or any other character we've seen before. He walks away with a very small injury, but that's far better than everyone else we've seen that's gone against Rao at this point. Disregarding the fight itself, a few things are said during this encounter that I'm sure most would find interesting. Rao mentions that Juza's fist is out of practice, and that an untrained fist should be no match for him before this small encounter starts. Semi-cueing us in that Juza may be strong in his own right, but due to his lifestyle, there's no chance he could compare to Rao's full strength, making it all the more impressive that he alone did better than pretty much the entire cast before him. As the fight starts, it's pretty clear Rao respects Juza, which already doesn't happen often, but after his helmet cracks, we get filled in on their backstory. Juza and Yuria were raised together and were good friends, an aspect expanded upon in the better sections of Juza Gaiden, by the way. Eventually, Juza falls in love with her. When they both come of age, his father reveals that that's actually his stepsister. Hey guys, M from the future here. You may have noticed I said stepsister there. I meant to say half-sister. Now this is a mistake I make throughout the entire video, so just for me please, just imagine I'm saying half-sister instead of stepsister in these recordings, okay? Robbing him the possibility of living with her, and causing him to give up on fighting entirely and just live free. There's a little bit more to unpack here than that, but I'll hold off on that for a second, as it's going to become more relevant later. Rihaku's men inform Juza that Kentro's coming to the Nanto General's tower. He tells them to go towards him as he prepares for his final encounter with Rao. He has one last speech with his men before he does, giving us an extremely powerful scene of Juza keeping his men away because he knows how dangerous this next encounter is going to be. When Juza eventually reaches Rao, you can feel that this fight has a definite finality to it. Juza immediately ripping his armor off, which if you played Yakuza, you know that means this is going to be the final fight for somebody. When they begin fighting, the two seem to be pretty close, but it's clear Rao has the upper hand. Juza manages to land a huge strike on Rao, but Rao smashes his fist into Juza's chest. I noticed this was a plan by Juza to take his arm off as he grapples Rao. It's funny to think back on this. Had it worked, it would have been a literal crippling blow to the final fight. Rao's strong, sure, but after losing a limb, Juza would have provided the perfect layup for Ken if he was unable to finish this fight here. And seeing this fight, I'm pretty sure it's clear to everyone he knew he couldn't really manage to defeat Rao here. As Juza has Rao pinned, they end up talking about the general's identity. I've been skipping over these segments, but at the same time all this is happening, Fudo is traveling with Ken. And they also end up discussing the general's identity. Here it's revealed to us and Ken, but not Rao, that the Nanto general this entire time has been Yuria. This is a huge shakeup for the show, as we thought she was dead this entire time. But even disregarding that, this makes Juza surrendering his life for someone make sense. It was the person he was the closest to. A person fate, in a sense, cruelly took from him. Remember when I said we'd return to the earlier topic of Yuria being his stepsister? This is why. I really love how this entire bit was handled. I imagine in a show with lesser writing, especially in Japan, they would have made Juza lust after Yuria anyways, disregarding the entire step-sibling aspect and just make him a complete creep, wishing to beat Raul so he could come back to Yuria himself. But instead, he doesn't. He wishes to protect his little sister and gives his life to keep her safe, completely disregarding the feelings he knows he can't harbor for her just to protect her. It's good stuff. Him distracting himself with tons of women now makes way more sense. As the one person he wanted to have, he never could. So in her place, he sleeps with tons of different people to fill that void. As it's pretty clear, he never fully got past it and was putting on a facade in a way. At least until this moment. Going back to the fight, Juza's plan doesn't work. Rao lifts Juza and holds him over his head, jabbing his fingers into some pressure points on the back of Juza's neck. Pressure points that will force Juza to talk. Rao then whispers into Juza's ear, asking him the identity of the general. Juza then gets visions of seeing Yuria walk away with Kensho. But more importantly and symbolically, visions of letting her go completely. As Rao leans in, Juza tells him to get bent, resisting his pressure points entirely through sheer willpower. Something we rarely ever get to see, and we've never seen before in this capacity. In frustration, he throws Juza to the ground, and as he seems to pass away, Rao prepares to leave. But Juza's body subconsciously gets up, continuing the fight against Rao in probably one of the coldest scenes in anime history. But of course, given he's a walking corpse by this point, he eventually falls, showing in the end, he went out on his own terms, in near every sense of the word. His blood is clear, reflecting the sky as it slowly leaks from him. Rao says his respects, and Kokoro even nudges him, signaling to Rao to give him a proper burial, which Rao agrees that he's earned one. This is our last encounter with Juza of the Clouds, and goddamn do I mean it when I say he's one of the best characters here. I couldn't understand how anyone would ever dislike this character after coming off of the anime. He has literally fucking flawless character writing. He got a way more fleshed out character arc than many here, and he executed most of it all by himself. He didn't have the main cast or any familiar faces to really bounce off of, meaning that he managed to become this good off of a pretty much fresh slate for us. In the past, I feel I was harsh on Fudo, as I thought he was an okay character but nothing super deep. Looking back, it's because unfortunately, he had to compete with, without a doubt, one of the best handled characters in the entire show. So even though he was traveling with Ken and later on gets his own moments, Juza was the main thing going through my mind during those patches. To the point where I often wanted them to stop focusing on Ken and the gang and solely push attention on him. The character drama, his fights, the depth, the potential he has for side stories. He's literally the peak HNK1 character for me, as it felt we never wasted any time with him, and every moment we had with him on screen was purposeful. I could keep glazing him, but this drifts into my next point and the next section of this video. A bit into making this, I ran into people calling him a creep, saying that he treated women wrong, and overall that he wasn't that impressive. Coming off the Juza hype train that was his arc, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How could you not like this character? The most I could give them at the time was Juza taking women was weird, but it never appeared that he held them against their will, so that seemed invalid to me. But a bit ago I accidentally ended up reading the manga of this arc, and it changes a few things, to the point he almost feels like a different character. I know it's technically more fitting to say the anime changed a few things, but hear me out and you'll most likely agree with me. First of all, Juza doesn't have his army in the manga. It's just him out in a mansion in the middle of nowhere. In a way, this makes sense, because it's kind of odd to imagine Juza acquiring a fighting force that large. But at the same time, they led to a lot of powerful scenes, so cutting them outright skewers a good chunk of potential for us to like him. Scenes like his men rallying behind him despite the odds, or them simply stopping bad guys. None of that happens here. The entire aspect of us being able to infer Juza's a good guy due to his die-hard army following him because they trust him, unlike all the other leader-type characters we've seen before this who ruled with strength or fear, cannot happen. Second, Juza straight just kidnaps women here and seems to be holding them against their will. The scene of him letting married women go is still present here. Hey, cut in M again? Okay, so you know how I just said they both say that marriage line? They don't. Manga Juza only brings up the fact that they have kids, and that kind of implies he doesn't care if they're with someone. He wants them anyway. The only thing stopping him is being a stepdad. So, take that as you will. But it seems pretty clear the others don't want to be here. A dramatic contrast to the anime where they seem to enjoy him and his army's company. And you might think this seems like a small aspect, but it really shifts the core of this character. He went from a guy indulging himself to hide from his past while still helping those around him, to a psychotic man kidnapping people to live out a twisted and delusional fantasy. He genuinely seems to be an unhinged villain at this point. Someone we'd root for Ken to beat down for being such a fucking weirdo. He shows similarities to Yuta of all people right now. You know, my least favorite HNK1 villain. Then we get to the final fight. The entire end section I mentioned where Juza's body fights on past death does not happen here. I'm sure if you saw the anime or were just a Juza fan, I don't need to tell you why this kinda sucks. This was one of the most iconic moments in the entire show, honestly. And especially for his character. I would argue the earlier things I mentioned were important story-wise, but this felt like the cherry on top of his character, his last act of rebellious defiance. But instead, he just dies after refusing to tell Raoh who the general is, which wasn't really a bad conclusion for his character as he still goes out on his own terms, but it doesn't have the same impact at all. These might sound like a bunch of small things, but as I kinda said earlier, they somewhat make a different character. It's not as drastic as something like Jaggy Gaiden Jaggy in comparison to Base Jaggy, but the manga's missing so many moments and aspects I considered key to his character. Sure, they followed the same point of a man-child turning into something greater to help someone they deeply cared about, and Manga Juza makes this shift more pronounced as he seemed downright scummy before Rihaku's men took him to meet Iria, so I imagine some would argue that this is the better version of him due to the prominent character shift. But, and I know I'm gonna sound like a fanboy when I say this, the sheer charisma anime Juza has kinda overrules it for me. It's hard to not at least like him after his initial appearance. And after everything else I've told you about the anime variant of him, this makes his death and sacrifice all the more impactful when we eventually reach that point. Overall, this is one of the few times I'd say this, but anime Juza will always be the canon Juza in my eyes. Not because manga Juza has flaws, but because the presentation with anime Juza is just so strong. People tend to say the anime and its filler tended to ruin or bloat a lot of things, but I never really thought of it that way. For the most part, they felt like expansions to help the story flow more freely and give us more excuses to see, well, more of this world. Juza, I feel, benefited from this more than most of the other characters, and I honestly doubt he would have been such an amazing character to me and many others without this rendition. And understand, I didn't even go into every single scene just to keep this video relatively short, as the anime gave him tons of small sections that continue to make him better and better, and make him feel even more human. Anyways, I've been yapping about this way too long, and I feel I made my point, so regardless, what do you guys think about Juza? Is he an amazing character, or maybe you think he's bad? As always, as long as you're respectful, I'm glad to discuss with you in the comments, and I've been it, and I am out.